President on this event, a very historic and significant event. His Excellency President Ferdinand E. Marcos arriving here at the Heroes Hall in Malacanang, together with the First Lady, Madam Imelda Romualdez Marcos. President Marcos and the First Lady have together seen through over the past 8 years the growth and the development of our country. With the hymn of the New Society in the background, with the words very aptly describing the strength and the deeper values that we have instituted in our society, the New Society. Seated with His Excellency President Ferdinand E. Marcos and the First Lady Madam Imelda Romualdez Marcos is the Speaker of the Batasang Pambansa, Minister of National Defense, and the Supreme Court Chief Justice.
Remain standing for the ecumenical invocation.
Let us pray. Our Almighty God, the Lord of all nations, on this momentous occasion, we come to your throne of grace with hearts filled with thanksgiving. We see and experience your unfailing love,
even as we look back through years behind us. With fear and trembling, we remember the perils and the crises which our country went through, and yet grateful for your sustaining grace, so that today we can see a brighter future of our country. We thank you for the leadership of our country, for its readiness to seek your guidance and will. We thank you, O Lord, for the gifts of fortitude which you have endowed our people, so that with faith and hope we courageously live and serve to bring about a day such as this. We thank you, O God, for giving our country men of dedication, courage, bravery, and unselfishness, in particular the active members of Pilkunsa, who would not rest until they see and realize what is best for our country and people. O Lord, we again seek your guidance and will as we face the greater needs and challenge of today. In view of your wisdom, our beloved President and all those upon whom we entrust the leadership and authority of our government, may their leadership continue to bring justice, peace, and prosperity in our land. Bless our people with honorable industry, sound learning, and strong faith. Save us from violence and discord and confusion, from pride and arrogancy, and from every evil way. Defend our liberties and fashion us into an stable and united people, always concerned for one another, patriotic and godly. On this eventful and historic day, we humbly dedicate ourselves to you. Sanctify us by your grace, so that henceforth, as ever, we would not fail in meeting the greater crises and challenges of the present and of the future. May we continue to seek your will and purpose in times of success and victory. Fill our hearts with humility in times of prosperity. Fill our hearts with thanksgiving, and in times of trouble, suffer not for our trust in you and our confidence in our leadership to fail. This is our prayer to you, our one God and Father, in the name of our Lord Jesus.
The ecumenical invocation by the representatives of the various religious denominations of the country.
The Honorable Enrique M. Fernando, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the Republic of the Philippines and founding member of the Philippine Constitution Association, will give the opening remarks.
President and Prime Minister Ferdinand E. Marcos, our beloved First Lady, Speaker Macalintal, Minister Ponce Enrile, Minister and President Vilconsa Ponce Enrile, Vice President and Minister Assemblywoman Carmencita Ongsiaco Reyes, my brethren in the Supreme Court and my colleagues in the judiciary, the distinguished members of the Batasan Pambansa, the cabinet members, our distinguished visitors from abroad, as well as the other government officials, and the Pilconsa members, ladies and gentlemen. The ecumenical prayer impressed on each and every one of us the transcendental importance of this occasion. I am certain there will be more celebrations of Constitution Day, but to my mind, perhaps none of greater significance. An event long awaited is about to happen, and therefore there is the mood of expectancy in the air, as well as the feeling of joy and rejoicing. I am therefore greatly honored to have been asked to participate in this program. Not that there was any thought of refusal, as the emissary sent is Vice President Carmencita Unciaco Reyes, whom my wife and I hold in the highest affection. She is the president of the Enrique Pio Fernando Jr. Memorial Foundation, and it was she who gave my late lamented son the opportunity to enter public service as her technical assistant. When she told me, however, that I was one of, according to her, the phrase is one of the founding fathers, although the phrase used here is a founding member, I demurred, because I am reminded of an article by the distinguished Professor Hamilton of Yale in discussing the 1787 Constitutional Convention. According to him, if some delegates of that convention could be called founding fathers, they achieved that distinction by inattention. He called it paternity by inattention. I used that phrase in one of the lectures that I delivered after the approval or after the effectivity of the present Constitution. And I remember in the open forum that followed, one member of the audience let out with the witness. That is the case with some delegates of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, perhaps with some delegates of the 1971 Constitutional Convention, and I, because I did not mention them in introduction, included President Sotero H. Laurel. I am certain what I'm going to say does not apply to any of the delegates of the 1971 Constitutional Convention, only those who are present today. Because according to the gentleman, I'm just repeating what he said, if that were true of the Constitutional Convention, perhaps with reference to some delegates in the 1971 Constitutional Convention, they achieved that distinction, and they could be referred likewise, not likewise, but they could be referred as achieving that distinction of paternity by abdication. Of course, to me, it was biologically impossible. By abdication, it seems to be a contradiction in terms, until someone reminded me of test tube babies. It is not unusual, however, really, for scholars in constitutional law, and I understand I was asked to speak primarily as a professor of constitutional law, for some scholars in constitutional law to carry the analogy further. There is an excellent article in the Juridical Review, the inaugural lecture of Professor Mitchell in the University of Edinburgh about the anatomy and pathology of the Constitution. Of course, not anatomy in the usual sense. And I do remember also that at one time, to carry the biological analogy further, a distinguished Brazilian ambassador, I think the name is Oswaldo Aramha, if that is the correct pronunciation, I am not too certain, and I quote from a certain memory, said that a constitution is like a maiden. To flower, it must be violated. Of course, as a professor of constitutional law, and more so as Chief Justice, I certainly do not endorse that sentiment, either in the biological or in the constitutional sense. Now, this second reason why at first I had some hesitancy is because, as I think most lawyers and most laymen know, I was one of the dissenters in the case of Abellana versus Executive Secretary. The decision that declared that there is no more judicial obstacle to the effectivity of the present Constitution. I was responsible for that phrase, as members of the court know, because to me, while there were 4 dissents, the moment we dismissed the case, and under my concept of judicial review, where the people look to the Supreme Court for guidance as to what is the law of the land, and in tribute or partly also to the late Macario Peralta, and I think the President will remember this, who told me, please remember, you in the Supreme Court, that what you're going to say in the Abellana decision will have an effect that will be fraught with peril or with safety to the country. He says, under the Commander-in-Chief clause, we, he says, and he said, he's speaking as a former general, we are bound to obey only the lawful orders of the President as Commander-in-Chief. He said, as you know, well, he called the President Ferdi, because I think at one time they were together. He said, as you know, Ferdi and I have come to the parting of the ways. I am not one of those who voted for him in 1965. I fought his election, but he is the elected President of the Philippines. And I am telling you as an army man that it's important that you make it clear that his decrees, if that is your decision, that his decrees constitute the law of the land and therefore should be obeyed, given full obedience. I mentioned that to the members of the court, and that phrase was inserted there, although there were 4 of us who dissented not because of the lack of merit of the Constitution, but because we felt that while it was validly proposed, there were some steps in the ratification process which to those of us, there were 4 of us, including Senior Associate Justice Claudio Tiangqui, the main opinion being written by the retired Chief Justice Roberto Concepcion, and one of the dissenters being the late Justice Saldivar, who were quite insistent on a literal application, although we that as far as the participatory process is concerned, the inclusion of really in a wider base for the democratic process. But at the same time, those of us who dissented were of the opinion that since the Constitution is a political document, the moment there is an acquiescence, whatever defect there could be, was ratified. There was no thought, at least to my mind, that the Constitution is not impressed with merit, and I said so in my dissent. So that there will be no inaccuracy, I'm going to read that portion of my dissent. To dissent was a difficult decision to make. It has occasioned deep thought and considerable soul-searching, for there are countervailing considerations that exert a compulsion not easy to resist. It can be asserted with truth, especially in the field of social and economic rights, that with the revised Constitution, there is an auspicious beginning for further progress. Then too, it could resolve what appeared to be the deepening contradictions of political life, reducing at times the governmental authority to near impotence and imparting a sense of disillusionment in democratic processes. Because 1970 convention was called a time of days of activism, when people felt that perhaps democracy as such was a failure. It is not too much to say, therefore, that there had indeed been the revision of a fundamental law to vitalize the very values out of which democracy grows. It is one which has all the earmarks of being responsive to the dominant needs of the times. It represents an outlook cognizant of the tensions of the turbulent era that was the present then. That is why for some, what was done represented an act of courage and of faith, coupled with the hope that the solution arrived at is a harbinger of a bright and rosy future. I am no prophet, but I think all of us present here realize that that bright and rosy future has indeed come under the present dispensation and under the present Constitution. For the Constitution is the embodiment of the hopes and the aspirations of a people for a more abundant life for all. It is likewise an expression of their ideal. President Marcos, in his speech before at the opening of the Constitutional Convention in 1971, I think in June of 1971, referred to it as a testament to reason. The Constitution is likewise a testament to faith in the capacity of a people to live up to its potential, to attain true greatness. And the task is all important. It's a living document. It has to be interpreted time and time again. When necessary, it has to be amended. Although in the language of Justice Cardoso, a constitution states, or ought to state, not the principles for the passing hour, but standards and principles for the expanding future, the events of which are locked up in the scrutable designs of providence. It's unlike a statute which may at the most capture the evanescent mood of the moment or the fugitive exigencies of the hour. In another rhetorical phrase, it is referred to not merely as the imprisonment of the past, but the unfolding of the future, not a printed finality, but a dynamic process. At the same time, a constitution is a product of a historical situation. And again, without quoting by name, I have come across many articles of noted scholars dealing with Europe as constitutions that clear that the national leadership to be entrusted with the task of implementation is a decisive factor in constitution making. So it was in the American Constitution of 1787, the thing that George Washington would be the president. So it was, according to Professor Lenhoff, with the 1871 Constitution of Otto von Bismarck, because I think he knew that he would remain as Chancellor. The Weimar Constitution of 1919, according to, well, an American author, prepared by Professor Frois, had in mind perhaps the socialist president ever, although later on it found out, especially under Article 48, that allows the suspension of fundamental rights, unlike in the present basic law of the German Constitution that makes clear fundamental rights cannot be suspended, which is the case in the Philippine Constitution, except for the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus and only under the circumstances therein enumerated. The man to whom the fate of the country is to be entrusted, the leadership, it has to be taken into account. That is true, even more true, of the 1958 Constitution of France. It was President de Gaulle that the Constitution was drafted according to his wishes. We don't have to go far afield. I think in India they had in mind the late Premier Nehru. Well, in the Philippines, in 1935, the Constitution was framed, and I've heard this often and very often from some of its framers who were my professors and who gave me the opportunity of learning further constitutional. Men like the late Jose P. Laurel, Claro M. Recto, Manuel Briones, kind of that distinguished group, that they had President Quezon in mind as the leader to implement the Constitution. In the 1973 Constitution, I think there was no doubt to whom the mantle of leadership has fallen and to whom it was likely to remain. So we are indeed fortunate that at the is President Ferdinand E. Marcos with the intensity of his commitment to the ideal of the rule of law, his unwavering concern to see to it that the society we have, of course, as stressed so very often by the First Lady, should be a truly compassionate society. And with his determination, which will carry us far because of his well-known decisiveness, that his mission as the leader of the government is to see that our dreams do not fade and our vision does not die. Thank you very much.
The Honorable Minister Juan Ponce Enrile, President of the Philippine Constitution Association, will introduce our beloved guest of honor.
Madam First Lady, Mrs. Imelda Romualdez Marcos, Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Macalintal, Mr. Chief Justice, Madam, Your Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, my colleagues in the Batasan Pambansa, members of the judiciary and the bench, my co-workers in government, especially those in the military organization, my friends. I deeply acknowledge this rare privilege of introducing our distinguished guest of honor and speaker. My entire career in the public service has been spent under his leadership. I've seen him work as chief executive, as a statesman, and as commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, especially at a most crucial period in our history. I shall not speak of the qualities of his leadership or his achievements as the leader of the Filipino people. These qualities of leadership and these achievements are best left to the judgment of history. Permit me, however, to say that beyond all his achievements, beyond all that he has done to keep our nation peaceful, secure, and progressive, he has brought honor and dignity not only to his office, but to the entire Republic by his deep and abiding respect for the Constitution, the highest law of the land. For indeed, under his leadership, the Philippine Constitution has found the fullest expression as an instrument for reform, for public order, and for social justice. It was the Constitution which ordained the proclamation of martial law and the birth of a new order. And it is the same Constitution which now provides the framework for the transition to normalcy and the promise of a greater Philippine society. It is for this that it gives me the highest honor and the great pleasure as President of the Philippine Constitution Association to present to all of you our fellow constitutionalist and friend, His Excellency President Ferdinand Edralin Marcos.
Thank you very much, Minister Juan Ponce Enrile of Defense. I greet the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and Mrs. Fernando, the Speaker of the Batasan Pambansa, and Mrs. Makalintal, Assemblywoman Carmencita, and of course, the lady who has jurisdiction of us here, since he's Governor of Metropolitan Manila and Minister of Human Settlements. I greet the foreign guests, special members of the Diplomatic Corps, the members of the Judiciary, the Supreme Court all the way down to the municipal courts, and our legislators, my fellow administrators in government, my history summons us once to an encounter with destiny. It is the privileged fate of generation, yours and mine, that it has been called twice by that same history to serve. Life and honor in the hour of crisis and the hour of need. The first time, of course, was when we had a war on our own making, in order to defend our country. The second time was when we had to impose on ourselves 8 years and 4 days, less than 4 months, of a martial discipline in order to save the Republic. Today we are privileged once again. We have another encounter with destiny. The magnitude of this moment necessarily brings us back to the very first crisis in the life of our people, when nearly a century ago our forebears in Pugadlawin, Tirad Pass, in Kawit, in Malolos, offered their lives, their happiness, and most valuable of all, their sacred honor to a quest that we pursue to this very day, the great quest for a new society. This was and has ever been the Filipino dream, a dream of a new order of national existence, a dream thwarted for close to a century. We have had 100 years of solitude, a century of alienation from one another, 100 years of humiliation and distorted values. And so it was that 8 years ago, the consequences fell upon us. A social order in which the privileged of the few were enjoyed over the degradation of the many. In some, the social indifference of the elites spawned the rebellion, which we then call the rebellion of the poor, in which legitimate grievances were exploited by conspiracy and subversion to bring about the destruction of the Republic of the Philippines. The death of a nation through violent revolution. Indeed, the perils which threatened the Republic then were brought about principally by the failure of the elites, the oligarchy, incarnated in a political society which deluded rather than educated the masses of our people in the ways of an authentic democracy. We had a political and social culture that was dominantly populist and opportunistic. History has shown to us how societies are saved and regenerated in various ways. In the few years, the kings curbed the excesses of the ruling barons, or vice versa. At other times, checked the abuses of kings. Still in other periods, governments protected the common good against the rapaciousness of the ruling class. An example from recent memory was President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's proclamation of the New Deal. Essentially, this was what we have since called the revolution from the center, which bought time for our people so that they could muster the strength to stem the tide of turmoil and rediscover their solidarity. The old Constitution, colonial it was, approved by an alien power as it was, nevertheless provided the legal and peaceful means for this quiet revolution. We were to have cherished and protected it, and we now have a new charter whose ratification we celebrate today, which we must cherish all the more, for it is our very own, for it brings together a new system, a new policy, and the resurgent spirit of a new people. There are those who would denigrate this Constitution. I am afraid they live in the past of their lost glories, a past when the freedom and the happiness of a few were held up as the freedom and the happiness of the many. It was a night or of a remembered greatness, shall we say. I am moved to recall how 16 years ago I appealed for the support of our people with an invitation to greatness. 7 years later, the gravest peril was upon us, menacing our lives and freedom, the freedom of generations yet to come. Anarchy, assassination, arson, pillage, destruction, immobilization of the economy, destruction of public buildings, and the proclamation that the new government would take over the Republic of the Philippines. I saw that crisis as the test of Filipino greatness, and I was elated that our people shared my vision. That crisis, my friends and my countrymen, is far from over, but we have proven ourselves in the past 8 years to be equal to any such crisis. To be sure, it had been necessary, imperative, to resort to the discipline of martial law, to summon the military to its sworn duty to defend and protect the Republic. But as events showed, contrary to our detractors, Cassandric warnings, our armed forces performed honorably and well. In accordance with the noble traditions of their warrior forebears, they upheld the Republic, but for the civil authority. They shall ever remain as a model, as an example that shall be set up if in days to come after this the Republic should ever stumble once again. Our people will ask, how did the military of that decade of the 70s, how did these noble warriors and soldiers conduct themselves in those crucial days? And they shall point to you as the heroes whose lives they must emulate. Yes, we owe them the highest commendation. Words are inadequate to express our gratitude to the men of the military and to the men of the civil government who quietly subordinated themselves in many cases whenever there was actual combat. The martial discipline has restored the pride, nay, the self-confidence of our race, so that now we can look upon ourselves as equal to every vicissitude, every burden, every challenge. We can now accept without reservations the invitations to greatness, the challenges of the modern world. The cynical, the timorous, who would doubt this had better look closely to what has transpired in this country in less than a decade, in the 8 short years of the new society. We have disarmed the criminal sin and significantly diffused the dangers of subversion, sedition, rebellion, and secession. All over the world today, you see the same symptoms spread out among all the third world countries. Fortunately, here in the Philippines, the symptoms have significantly and substantially been reduced. These were the results of the relentless and determined campaign to re-establish public order. 200 private armies were dismantled, 250 criminal syndicates identified and their members apprehended and neutralized, 650,000 firearms within a period of 2 or 3 years, of all classes, make, and variety, including artillery, machine guns, assault rifles, tanks, armored cars, and the latest models of sophisticated armaments. Perhaps 10 times more than the arms of the armed forces of the Philippines were confiscated or they were surrendered to the government. More than 2,000 ordinary criminals long wanted under unserved warrants of arrest before the proclamation of martial law were immediately apprehended and brought before the courts. The leftists and the rightists joining together in rebellion were successively apprehended, eliminated or neutralized, thus reducing the rebellion to small pockets of resistance in a few places. The colonial centuries-old hostilities in southern Philippines between Christian and Muslim brothers, which exploded 8 years ago into a formidable secessionist war, in which was estimated 20,000 fully armed men, some of whom were trained outside the Philippines, were set against the small garrisons of the police and the Philippine constabulary while we were fighting the leftist-rightist rebellion here in Luzon. This has been effectively terminated with the granting of amnesty to more than 37,000 members of the Moro National Liberation Movement. This, plus the establishment of the two autonomous governments in Regions 9 and 12, effectively terminates that movement. The armed forces of the Philippines and the intelligence agencies have succeeded in apprehending and immobilizing the leaders and the members of the Partido Nagkaisang Socialista Demokratiko ng Pilipinas, or SOCDEM, which differs from all other socialist parties in that it promotes violence. And so have the armed forces and the intelligence apprehended the leaders and members of the Light of Fire movement, which seems to be the umbrella organization covering all those involved in terrorism, bombing, kidnapping, arson, blackmail, as well as plots and conspiracies for the assassination of leading personalities in the military and in the civil government. But more than this, we have transformed the lives of millions of our countrymen. Land reform, the principal cause of the Hukbalahap uprising, because of the repeated failure of the landowner-controlled Congress to redress the grievance of centuries, was instituted. Some of you who are listening to me now belong to that rebellion, but you have joined the new society. I see here Mr. Luis Taruk, Assemblyman of representing Leyte. I see many of the rebels from the south attending here. I see Al Calwan, the original field marshal of the Moro National Liberation Front. I see Commander Roni. I see Jamil Lukman. I see all these rebels who have raised the flag of intransigence against the Republic of the Philippines now joining hands in order to strengthen this commitment to the Republic for the maintenance of public order all over the land. And why did the Hukbalahaps join hands with the government? Because large estates were broken up and sold to the actual tillers of the soil. Because we immediately terminated the enslavement of the poor tenant farmer who inherited generations and generations of indebtedness without any possibility of payment whatsoever from his forebears to the landlord. This we immediately redressed with a single stroke of the pen. A new labor code was promulgated, providing, among others, the joining together of management and labor with government, a tripartite conference for the settlement of issues and thus assuring industrial peace to allow economic growth. Social reforms also included the implementation of a nutrition program. There are now 4,000 day centers all over the land. Ours is a model which has been adopted by the United Nations. A health program, a family planning program which have were long denied the humblest and the poorest of our countrymen. Our educational system has been reoriented to meet the needs of social and economic development, with its emphasis on vocation existence through scientific research, where before there was nothing but rhetoric and charlatanism. We have instituted the researches. We have created an institute of plant breeding and created exotic varieties of plants that bid well to increase our harvest. And now we have started an institute of microbiology which shall utilize the new science of recombinant DNA. In the administration of justice, which again caused the rebellion of the poor in our own society, we have assured our people expeditious, inexpensive, and democratic justice with the organization of barangay courts. The interim Batasang Pambansa is in the process of reorganizing the judicial system of government with the participation of the Supreme Court, with the aim in view of eliminating delays, bottlenecks, and clogged dockets in the courts, as well as the elimination of its unworthy members, few as they may be. Our government has succeeded in reorganizing the National Prosecution Service and creating a nationally pervasive, free legal service under the Ministry of Justice. We thus give substance to that constitutional and moral mandate that every man shall be entitled to his day in court. The political transformation, above all, assures us of a truly democratic system. The organization of the barangays has brought about an explosion of political participation, as evidenced by the militancy of its members and by the participation of 23 million voters, whereas before in 1969 there were only 8 million voters. I place my fervent hopes on the barangays and on the Sangguniang. They are the testament to and the vehicle of popular sovereignty. With the barangays, power indeed has been returned to the people. Mabuhay ang mga barangay. The last 8 years have also mobilized the energies of the Filipino for economic health in his society. And I believe we have yet to demonstrate, we have demonstrated our capacities fully. Let us look at some of the data and statistics with your permission. I shall be sure the gross national product increased from 55,526,000,000 pesos in 1972 to 192,911,000,000 in 1979 at 1972 constant prices, or 269,781,000,000 pesos at current prices. Collections of government from taxes have increased from 5.1 billion pesos in 1972 to 36.16 billion pesos in 1980. Total exports increased from 1.106 billion, 1 billion in 1972, dollars, US, in 1972 to 5,935,000,000, almost 6 billion in 1980. Showing the stability of the currency, notwithstanding the present fluctuations of the dollar. The rate of exchange of the peso to the US dollar has barely moved from the 1972 6.67 to the 1979 7.37. Savings and time deposits have increased from 5,402,000,000 pesos in 1972 to 49,116,000,000 as of September 1980. Gross domestic investment has not only doubled, trebled, quadrupled, quintupled. From 11, it has increased to about 80 million. In 1980, while gross national savings increased from 11,679,000,000 pesos to 62,395,000,000 in 1980. There was a time when the debt service ratio before this administration was more than 40% of the dollar earnings the previous year. This has been reduced to 20%, and now, as of 1980, reduced to 18.7% of foreign exchange earnings in the previous year. Incidentally, on the question of indebtedness, when we took over as president in 1965, most of the indebtedness were short-term indebtedness, payable within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. More than 90%. All of these were immediately shifted or converted into long-term indebtedness for some reason or other, because of inefficient management of our affairs, because of our bad credit worthiness. We could not borrow any money from anywhere. The most that the World Bank could lend us before 1965 was $40 million. By 1975 and 76, the World Bank had changed its opinion of the Philippines so much so that it was ready to lend at a single time $500 million. But most of these borrowings did not go to government. They went into productive enterprise. The borrowings of government do not go to pay for salaries or what we in government call ordinary or current expenditures, housekeeping, salaries of officers and employees, as well as furniture, equipment. No. On the current budget, there is always a surplus. Since 1965 to the present, there has always been a surplus in the current budget of the Republic of the Philippines. We have borrowed. Yes, we have borrowed, but only for purposes of productive enterprise. These are the self-paying and self-regenerating enterprises which we must support. And incidentally, nobody lends you money if you cannot give a counterpart. The least counterpart that is required is about 50% of the entire cost of the project. Now let's go to international reserves. International reserves were increased from practically zero in 1965. The statistics say $282 million were left in the central bank. When I asked the central bank, however, I was told that our commitments exceeded $300 million. And therefore, we did not have enough foreign exchange to pay our indebtedness as of 1965. The foreign exchange reserves were practically zero. And today, how much are the foreign exchange reserves? Today, we have $3.1 billion in the central bank as the foreign exchange reserves of the Republic of the Philippines. Finally, we speak of social indicators. How do all this affect the individual? What is his individual income? The per capita income, if we must talk in terms of all the people, has more than trebled from $214 US in 1972 to $755 US in 1980. And what do these figures mean to our masses, to our people? Some say the rich have grown richer and the poor have grown poorer. Well, we will not say they are blind to the facts. Let us say that they are prone to exaggeration. It is true, of course. The rich will grow richer because they have the funds and the capital, and we have no intention of confiscating private property. It is not a part of the ideology of the new society to confiscate private property and private enterprise. But we shall regulate wealth, and we regulate wealth so it shall not be utilized to brutalize the poor and the weak of our people. And thus it is that the rich must pay heavier taxes. It is said that we have been easy on the rich with respect to taxes. This is not true. We increased the corporate tax very recently by 5%. We increased the taxes on luxury goods, the goods that are bought by the rich, that are open only to the more affluent members of our society. Even in the case of oil products. Did you notice the difference between the tax between diesel fuel and industrial fuel and gasoline? It is a big jump, for it is the purpose of this administration that first of all, we shall not be zero. And today, how much are the foreign exchange reserves? Today, we have $3.1 billion in the central bank as the foreign exchange reserves of the Republic of the Philippines. Finally, we speak of social indicators. How do all this affect the individual income? The per capita income, if we must talk all the people, has more than trebled from $214 US in 1992 to $755 US in 80. And what do these figures mean to our masses, to our people? Some say the rich have grown richer and the poor have grown. Well, let's say they are blind. Let us say that they are prone to exaggeration. It is true, of course, they will grow richer because they have the funds and the capital, and we have no intention of confiscating private. It is not part of the ideology of the new society to confiscate private. But we wealth, and we wealth, so it shall not be utilized to brutalize the poor and the weak of our people. And thus it is that the rich must pay heavier taxes. It is said that we have been easy on the rich with respect to taxes. This is not true. We increased the corporate tax very recently by 5%. We increased the taxes on luxury goods, the goods that are bought by the rich, that are open only to the difference between fuel, gasoline. It is a big jump, for it is the purpose of this administration to situate, first of all, not only regulate wealth, we shall ask those who are capable and those who participate in harvesting the rewards of a progressive society to contribute what is just and proper to the maintenance of our republic. Yes, have no doubt about it. The wealthy have been discouraged from exercising the ways of the old oligarchy. But I am prepared to think that of our people today have developed a social conscience that is growing day by day. How often have they come, the members of the cabinet, offering contributions to worthwhile and noble projects? How often have they quietly done their own planning in order to uplift the poor and the degraded race and people? Let it not be said that because they are rich, they are not patriotic Filipinos. Even the rich and the affluent country have acquired. This is one of the developments of the new society. Now let's this as to the distribution. Who cannot that this is a new world altogether, and that income is now seeping into all classes of people. In 1972, the percentage of families with incomes 1,999 pesos and below was 24.3%. In 1979, this had been reduced to 11.2%, or by more than. Let's go to the top. The families with incomes of 30,000 and more. In 1972, there were only 5% of them of the entire population. Now, today, there are more than twice that. there are 12.8% of those who have this high income. And considering that almost all of these families that I speak of live in the rural areas, the new society is set to effectively change the living of the Filipino masses. Finally, the effective minimum wage has increased from 4 pesos and 75 centavos in 1972 to 23.30 to 24 pesos and 70 centavos in 1980. Along with these political, economic, and social transformations, we must count the newly won prestige in the family of nations. Yes, the president of the PhilConsa, Minister Juan Ponsen, really referred to the new prestige, the new standard of our country in the United forums of the third world, and we have normalized relations with socialized countries. Before this, and even to China, to the socialist countries of Eastern Europe, we limited ourselves to considered to be the pillars of the free world, and thus penalized ourselves and our products, for our markets were limited. The Philippines is now heard in the Council of Nations because it speaks with its own voice. An independent foreign policy is the hallmark of the Philippine Foreign Service. We all independence, and we do not. Political independence must be won every day. Every time there is any threat or doubt cast upon that independence, not only the leadership but the citizenry must rise up and protect that independence. After much agonizing negotiations with the United States of America, in fairness to this ally of ours, recognized what is undeniable, and that is the sovereignty of the Republic of the Philippines over all the military bases of the Philippines, including that of Subic Naval Base and Clark Air Force Base, against the doctrine which indicated that America retains sovereignty over the bases. Because of our martial interlude, our defense establishment and our armed forces have quietly established a self-reliant defense posture. As you know, defense and military establishment is not prone to publicizing its achievements or to bragging about its capabilities, but very quietly, in the past 8 years, not only has it trained its personnel to meet any contingency, whether internal or external, it has systematically organized not only its own activities, but civil industry to meet most of its requirements. The government, which itself needed reforms in the crisis of 1972, has been reorganized. How many have we kicked out of government? More than 6,000. In the armed forces, more than 8,800 men. Very few people know that. We kicked out of the civil government 6,000 officers and employees. And many of them are still facing cases and charges before the Sandigan Bayan and the Tanud Bayan. In the armed forces of the Philippines, we punished 8,800 officers and men over a period of 8 years. let no man say that we have not exerted the utmost diligence in maintaining discipline in the enforcement of our laws and Constitution under the Republic of the Philippines. Yes, we have eliminated the undesirable elements, and we will continue the campaign against corruption through the establishment of the Tanud Bayan, which, as you know, is the Ombudsman, and the Sandigan Bayan, which you know is the court for corruption cases. We are now actually engaged in identifying the corrupt government officials and functionaries. Conscious of the hardships ahead, therefore, we have embarked also on an effort to upgrade the civil service. And now, we have also met head-on this problem and crisis on energy. We have accelerated the energy program, which includes the intensified search and prospecting for oil and gas and other hydrocarbons within our jurisdiction. We have discovered and are beginning to exploit new coal deposits. The entire island of Semirara, we discover, is coal. Deposits in Cagayan Valley are all over the entire valley, in Bicol, Mindanao, and Samar. We've discovered geothermal sources. 8 geothermal units or geothermal centers of energy are operational. 6 are being constructed. We are next to the United States in the volume of electricity coming from geothermal sources. Hydroelectric power is moving on. As you know, the biggest in Southeast Asia is being put up in the Magat, Isabela. We have discovered Mars gas or surface gas. We use biomass, dendrothermal. Many countries here represented, including France, Germany, England, have lent us money for the dendrothermal projects, and the Scandinavian. We have discovered exotic plants which produce juice and burn like gas. By only yesterday, the other day, the hunger, which I know since boyhood, the fruit of a vine in Ifugao, was brought back. We pressed the fruit, and out came the juice, and we lighted it like gas. You go all over the land. There are many plants from which we can draw gas. There are conventional, indigenous, and renewable sources of energy which we must tap, and we shall tap. At this point, I must note the number of rural households that have access to electricity. In 1972, 76,000 households had access to rural electricity. Today, there are 1 million households that have rural electricity. We are next to the United States rural electrification. No other the way we develop rural electrification. This increase is symbolic of the renaissance of the Filipino. Then, of course, the renaissance of our political life. In less than a decade of the democratic revolution, it is inevitable that this would be translated in spiritual terms. The renaissance in our culture, the rebirth and growth of the arts, music, painting, dance, film, literature. And why? What is the importance of this? How often has song, dance, music, literature, flame the rise up to attain the ends of freedom. How often have our forebears, the propagandists of the last century, used literature in order to lay the moral basis for a rebellion that would free our country? Culture, tradition, belief in our past, this is the unifying force. We look back, we trace the roots of our identity, and we discover that no reason to be so humiliated and to for the race. We have contributed our people's genius to the arts of this century. We have also rediscovered our ancient art forms, our spiritual heritage. In doing so, we have rediscovered ourselves, the Filipino. The Filipino reclaimed itself, and this is only the beginning. The last 8 years, what could be achieved through discipline. The 80s will dramatize to us what can be achieved through self or inner discipline. Our wise men of the last century, the essential thing is not to win battles. The essential thing is to win the internal revolution. The revolution within one's, our minds. For in the end, the transformation of a society means the transformation of man. It's man. Thus from this day on, we must be conscious and heed the invitation to greatness. National greatness, as we all know, means two things. Militancy of a concerned citizen and the social commitment of a responsible elite, especially the intellectual elite. Let me repeat that. We shall need two things, the two weapons as we move forward from this day on. The militancy of a concerned and enthusiastic citizen, and at the same time, the commitment of a motivated elite, especially the intellectual elite of our country. We have had their support. We need this more than ever now. I call upon all of you. I call upon the local executives, military men who was saying, raise them above those who have not gone wide and deep. Professional men. We have the highest world in relation to population. Elite we must draw, who would be the leaders of our country in the next generation. Martial necessity has passed. It has, yes, and served well the purpose of man's beleaguered cannot go on. Must mature, grow from outer discipline into, and so it is that as I promised all Agreement. Morning of September 23, 1907, when I announced the proclamation of martial law, which had been signed before. With your support, myself, my life, and my family's life and honor, judgment of his, that when the time came when I must or we must end martial law, and that time could be seen then, I am the first to move in the termination of martial law. I have listened to you, our people. I have heard your doubts, your anxieties. Next, outright into the lifting of martial law. And I have prayed to the Almighty for guidance. Judgment, souls that I terminate martial time of crisis. The world, many protect well then. Now shall bring you and freedom. Trust in this mark and final seats and drink life. Undoubtedly. But we could if there characteristically we were all haunted guerrillero fighting elusive in the hills. For that was many of us land it were or had. Yet notwithstanding, one had to present the stern face of a leader, the dominating quality of, and at the time resolutely promised to each other, sorry, we would go mountains, and if necessary, losing battles with a smile in our lips. Support of the people to do that. Spontaneous unanimity upon of martial law, you could hear the sigh of relief all over the land, from the north to the south, from the east to that we retain trust of people. Shades of be tempered credentials of legality and constitution. This way was it. The commander-in-chief, of course, was contrived by as a device to consolidate power of colonized people. Those who drafted the commander-in-chief provision never dreamt it would be used instead by an unaffected people who lost self-respect, dignity, and honor. In the long run, to be quite candid, the intellectual adventure is more exhilarating, inspiring. Only the observer will realize that the table had been turned, and the legal weapon in the dark past that was used to browbeat our people down to their knees in submission to alien authority had been captured from the enemy through ingenuity and by some miracle of self-assertion, and used to attain the noble dreams of our people. And so as I now sign this proclamation in full view of our nation and the world at large, I am profoundly conscious of the tasks that remain, hoping that we shall not lose the momentum of our achievements, so that those who shall come after us may carry the quest of a greater, a brighter world, a new society. I pray now, and I ask you to pray with me, as I prayed 8 years ago, that I am doing, that we are doing the right thing by our people. For the end of martial law does not mean the end of our efforts, of our needed reforms, of our struggles, of our sacrifices. The passing of the martial necessity does not carry with it the passing of all the burdens, especially the heavy ones. There will be more tests for our capacity, for our resiliency, our strength as a people. Together we must pass these tests, surmount all crises. And so, as I have said, I signed in your presence, proclaiming the termination of the state of martial law throughout the Philippines. I say, we have just begun. I will now read the dispositive portion of this decree. Now therefore I, Ferdinand E. Marcos, President, Prime Minister of the Philippines, by virtue of the powers vested in me by the Constitution, do hereby revoke Proclamation 1081, proclaiming a state of martial law in the Philippines, and Proclamation number 1104, dated January 17, 1973, declaring the continuation of martial law, and proclaim the termination of the state of martial law throughout the Philippines, provided that the call to the armed forces of the Philippines to prevent or suppress lawless violence, insurrection, rebellion, and subversion shall continue to be in force and effect, and provided that in the two autonomous regions in Mindanao, upon the request of the residents thereof, the suspension of the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall continue, and in all other places the suspension of the privilege of the writ shall also continue with respect to persons at present detained, as well as others who may hereafter be similarly detained for the crimes of insurrection or rebellion, subversion, conspiracy, or proposal to commit such crimes, and for all other crimes and offenses committed by them in furtherance or in the occasion thereof, or incident thereof, or in connection therewith. General Order Number 8 is also hereby revoked, and the military tribunals created pursuant thereto are hereby dissolved. Pursuant to Article 17, Section 2, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution, all proclamations, orders, decrees, instructions, acts promulgated, issued and done by the incumbent president constitute part of the law of the land and shall remain valid, legal, binding, and effective even after the lifting of martial law, unless modified, revoked, superseded, or altered by subsequent proclamations, orders, decrees, instructions, or other acts of the incumbent president, or unless expressly and explicitly modified or repealed by the National Assembly or the Batasan Pambansa. In witness hereof, I have set my hand and caused the seal of the Republic to be affixed on the 17th day of January 1981. Thank you.
His Excellency President Ferdinand E. Marcos signing the proclamation lifting the state of martial law throughout the Philippines. A day of history as we also commemorate the celebration of the ratification of the Constitution. His Excellency stands of the past 8 years, the formulation and the creation of the new society. At the same time, the entire Filipino people stands with pride with him, as he himself has initiated this great leadership and this great vision to make the Filipino nation and the Filipino truly great.
It certainly has been a very historic, emotional, touching moment. Clearly, no doubt, there is a certain dimension to this affair here that one cannot capture in words. The men of the military, the armed forces of the Philippines, General Espino, General Ramos, General Abad, General Sarmiento, General Paz, Commodore Alejandro, they're all going and talking to the First Lady and the President. As I said, it's been quite an emotional moment here at the Heroes Hall in Malacanang. The First Lady obviously touched by the eloquence of the President and the forcefulness with which he delivered this address, and the very deep sense of leadership, patriotism, and faith that the President evidenced in that address this morning. He has always maintained his faith in the integrity of our nation and our people, in their good sense, and the fact that they have stood by him through all the moments of anguish, difficulty, and crisis. and very clearly he is depending and relying on that particular level of support and faith in him, as he mentioned in his address. A large group of people crowding around the presidential table with the president and the first lady. We see members of the diplomatic corps here who are still gathered at the Heroes Hall. None of them have made any effort to move. I see Ambassador Murphy here, and the Honorable Indonesian Ambassador, His Excellency the Ambassador of Indonesia, First Lady, and the President here, Speaker Makalintal, the members of the Cabinet, members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the gracious First Lady, Minister Enrile now in conversation with the President. As the President so eloquently pointed out in his speech this morning, it's a question of faith, and very clearly our people have strengthened their faith under his leadership and will continue to do so. The achievements of the past 8 years under the leadership of President Marcos have clearly indicated that the people by and large are behind him, have supported him, and he has called for them to continue that support with the same resoluteness that they have shown in the past. The challenge indeed is perhaps a new one, new challenges, but as I said, it is an emotional moment for all of us here who have in a sense been a part of this, the President moving down this way towards us with Speaker Makalintal and the First Lady. Yes, sir. Congratulations, Mr. President. Tremendous speech, and the faith of our people will be with you.
I hope that they maintain the trust that they have reposed in the political leadership.
You have always you've always acted with dignity and with the interest of our people as your first consideration, Mr. President, and we know you will continue to do so.
Thank you. Thank you for your generous words.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ma'am, it was an emotional moment for all of us, but I think you must be proud with the faith, the courage, and the vision of this man.
Yes, this is truly a very historical, momentous, and happy occasion. For we can all be happy to say that this is we have achieved a prideful level of in the redemption of our identity, dignity, and humanity as a people. And this tribute is not only for the President, but for each and every Filipino who has really achieved all of this. To them, from the bottom of my heart, a deep full appreciation and gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Chief Justice? Mr. Chief Justice, sir. Can we have a word from you, Mr. Chief Justice? In the midst of this large crowd that gather around the First Lady as she moves away from... Mr. Speaker, you're going to be on our program tonight at 9:30.
Yes, 9:30, Channel 4, that's in Bohol Avenue.
Right, we'll discuss the full implications of this.
Okay.
Mr. Chief Justice?
Well, I made the opening remarks. I made clear the significance of the occasion, and certainly I think the whole country joins the President in rejoicing at this turn of events. And I'm sure that under his leadership, the problems that some could foresee would not eventuate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chief Justice. We were speaking to the Honorable Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Enrique Fernando. Rita?
I think it is with a great sense of pride that everybody who has gathered here this morning at the Heroes Hall here in Malacanang truly feel identified with the President. This decision to lift martial law on this day, coinciding with the celebration of the ratification of the Constitution of 1973, speaks indeed highly of the leadership of this nation and of the Filipino people as a whole. We have, as I said earlier, gathered here not only our high-ranking government officials, but also the members of the diplomatic corps who have witnessed this historic occasion. As the President has said, he has addressed himself firstly to the Filipino people and to the world, and it indeed goes down in the history of our nation to have weathered through this crisis of the past 8 years and have been able to prove to ourselves with deep pride and conviction that we can carry on without the outer constrictions of martial rule.
Rita, is the president still finding great difficulty moving out of the hall? Everybody around him, around the president and the first lady, seeking to congratulate him. I wonder whether I'll get a few words from the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, a very quiet gentleman who does a very good job, General Romeo Espino. The President, General Espino, paid the Armed Forces full tribute for the manner in which they conducted themselves during this difficult 8 years. What do you see your role in the days ahead?
We'll have to, I feel that there'll be no change in our role. We'll continue as we were doing, because we were not doing anything unusual during the last 8 years, but keep the peace.
And you will continue to keep the peace and defend the Republic as good soldiers normally do?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much, General Espino, the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, General Romeo Espino, saying that there won't be any particular or any special change in their role. What they did was keep the peace as they are expected to do, and they will continue to do so. So he sees no real change in the role of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. We'll move around to get more reactions from different people. I see Cesar Miraflor, the former Comelec Commissioner Cesar Miraflor. Good morning, sir. What are your initial reactions to the President's speech?
Oh, well, I was near an American, the one who paid a tribute to him last night, Mr. Cavilti, and he said, I have never heard a speech like that before. He was a consultant of President Johnson, and he was all praise for the President, and we're proud of it.
And as a man who was involved in the Commission on Elections, as a member of the PhilConsa, you must have some special thoughts about this.
Oh, yes. You know, I used to say that martial law was from the beginning in the laws approved by America. From the instruction to President McKinley, Jones Law, the 35 Charter, approved by President Roosevelt, martial law was there. And martial law continues. It is of American origin, and we respect it.
Thank you very much. Former Comelec Commissioner, now member of the PhilConsa, Cesar Miraflor. Thank you very much, sir. Rita?
The President has just passed here, milling through a very thick crowd that stretches out to congratulate both him and the First Lady. Indeed, as we've said, it's an emotionally packed day for all of us who've gathered here and perhaps for the entire Filipino nation. One of the most splendid addresses delivered by the President on this occasion, stressing with great pride the deep conviction not only of the leadership of the nation but of the entire Filipino people. We have seen how over the past 8 years we have weathered through this crisis and the crisis government that has survived the many conflicting areas, and finally on this very day we see the beginning of the greater responsibility and the greater task ahead.
Rita, when the martial law proclamation was first made public, the letters of instructions, the presidential decrees, the man who was in the forefront of our television screens for many, many years was the then Minister of Public Information, Francisco Estatad. He has seen the passing of time through 8 years, and there have been nuances in the developments and in this passage of time, and he perhaps, like the President and perhaps Minister Enrile, must feel particularly deeply on this occasion. Mr. Tata.
Yes, indeed. The lifting of martial law, particularly the reading of this positive portion of the proclamation by the President, rekindled some memories. I was before the cameras in 1972 for something like 2 hours reading the original proclamation, and from the time on I was consistently on camera explaining decrees, proclamations, general orders, and as you very well know, I served the position for almost the entire length of the martial law regime. I left the government only in January last year, and indeed I must say that something in me was moving, was touched all the while that I was listening to the President.
And of course, you must look with a deal of optimism to the future and the challenges it poses.
Well, I think we owe it to ourselves to look at the future with confidence. The past 8 years have been years of challenge. Many areas I think we have done very well. In other areas we may not have done as well as we wanted to. But I believe there is basic unity within the nation that could propel the government in its move forward. And that I think that we have come to recognize that the progress of this country will not lie purely in the effort of government, but will come from the collective effort of all sectors in the society, with all the sectors interacting with government.
Well put, sir. Thank you very much. Assemblyman Francisco Tata. Rita is with Ambassador Murphy. Rita?
Yes, Ronnie, I have here Ambassador Murphy of the United States of America, together with the several chiefs of missions of the diplomatic corps, have attended and witnessed with us this proclamation of the President. And perhaps we can get a reaction from the Ambassador on the address made by the President and his proclamation to lift martial law.
Well, certainly, I found it a most forceful, eloquent statement on the part of the President about the background of what had motivated him to declare martial law back in 1972, and the reasons that have now convinced him that the time has come to lift it. We do think that his move is timely. We think, I would say that it's an important step in the right direction, and we very much welcome it.
Against the background of the incoming new administration of the United States of America, how will this affect further the relationship between our two countries?
I think it would be wrong for me to speculate on the future of relations of the administration, which is not yet started, but I think, as I say, this is a very positive step, and I'd rather not speculate too much on the future.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Richard Murphy of the United States of America. As we've said, the President did indeed has stressed the importance of this occasion, and of course the strength that we have as far as foreign policies are concerned. Ronnie?
Yes. We were moving around to Minister Australia. Minister Australia, Minister of Agrarian Reform. Well, martial law, when it was instituted, one of the most significant moves by the President, aside from the proclamation instituting martial law, was the land reform effort of this government, the freeing of the tenant from the bondage of the soil. How has that program progressed this past 8 years, and do you think that at this stage there's enough impetus for it to carry through?
You know, Ronnie, that was really the most historic thing that the President did, and no other President have done that. The first step he did upon declaration of martial law was declaring the whole country a land reform area. That is decree number 2. The second was the emancipation of tenant farmers from the bondage of soil. That is presidential decree number 27. And after 8 years, we made a report to the President that we have finished the land transfer operation. We have actually transferred the land to the tenant tiller. And that is the most historic thing, I believe. Not because I'm handling the program, and I am happy that the President entrusted the whole program to me. Now that the President lifted the martial law, it is another historic event. It is just as historic as when he declared martial law.
I see. Now, as the President himself has pointed out, the farmers own the land, they till, they live better, they work harder, they are an integral part of our society.
That's right, Ronnie. You go out in the countryside, you will notice that the farmers had never had it so good under martial law, under President Marcos.
But there are going to be challenges ahead, no doubt.
Yes, of course. We will see to it that we have to protect the gains we have made. We will not allow it to be negated or nullified.
Thank you very much. Our Minister of Agrarian Reform, Conrado Estrella. I'll move across and see whether I can get a few words from Minister Virata, who is actually being interviewed by...
As some people fear economic bankruptcy.
Well,
I really don't know why all of these bad words are being used now, of economic bankruptcy. There is no such thing. We are developing. Our per capita income has increased. Our improvements in the Philippines has increased. The number of enterprises, we have many more people. The market at large. We have gained international standing as far as credit is concerned, and I do not see the point why our own people will say that we are in the brink of disaster, of bankruptcy. I think we should be more positive in outlook rather than detract from the main effort to continue building our country.
Okay, thank you very much. Rita, are you? Yes, Rita.
Ronnie, I have here the president of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Mr. Ed Angara, who has been very much involved in many of the legal discussions during the martial law days. And of course, with the helm of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, we have had many programs and analysis from his end. And perhaps we could have a post-martial law analysis from Attorney Angara.
Well, I think it's a tremendous boost, because first of all, it leaves a very heavy psychological burden on the minds of the ordinary citizen. Now I think the ordinary average citizen can feel that he can air or raise any legitimate grievance he has in dealing with government agencies. I think that's in general the biggest positive post-martial law lifting effect. The other, to me, depends really on two key institutions. One is the Batasan and the other is the media. I think the positive impact of the lifting of martial law will continue and will remain to be positive as long as the members of the Batasan continue to be responsible and see their role to be constructive and positive. On the other hand, I also see that media or the press is a key institution in a post-martial law society, because the press and parliament are mood indicators of the society. They set the mood of the citizen and the business climate. So depending on how the two key institutions conduct themselves in a post-martial law society, I think will depend whether the lifting is positive or negative.
How about from the point of view of legal practitioners?
From the point of view of legal practitioners, I think maybe the timidity and the reluctance to question the legality or the propriety of certain governmental action will vanish, maybe not overnight, but slowly.
Well, thank you very much, Ed, the president of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Attorney Eduardo Angara, with some analysis and reactions coming from his end. Ronnie?
I'm actually waiting to talk to Assemblyman Emmanuel Pelaez, who's just given me a sign that he's going to come over, because we'd like to talk to Assemblyman Pelaez about the very real role that the Batasang Pambansa will now have to play in the scheme of things. President Marcos himself indicated in his address that a great deal of responsibility will rest with the Batasang Pambansa, the Legislative Assembly, that has now taken upon itself the burden of all legislation. Prior to the lifting of martial law, the President was empowered to legislate on his own through presidential decrees, letters of instructions, and so on. Now that burden, that heavy task, has been transferred to the Batasang Pambansa, and we'll see how gentlemen like Emmanuel Pelaez will respond to this challenge, sir.
The television interrogator.
Sir, thank you. The question is now, the President has given the Batasan Pambansa a challenge and a great responsibility. How must and how will this assembly respond to that challenge and this responsibility?
Well, as a matter of fact, we have talked this over, and just a few minutes ago, a group of Batasan members have agreed to file a resolution. Firstly, to congratulate the President for his successful stewardship of the country under martial law. especially in defending the security of the country. And secondly, to express the sense of the Batasan and of every member to renew its determination to carry on with the gains of martial law until we shall have reached that point where we can shift to the elections of 1984 and elect a regular assembly. I could sense among my colleagues in the Batasan as we were listening to the president that while the feeling was one of elation, at the same time there was a sober realization of the fact that the ball is now with the people and primarily the Batasan Pambansa.
It was also quite an emotional moment.
Yes. Oh yes, oh yes. Well, whenever you make a change, you already know what is there, and then you plunge into something unknown. For 8 years, as the president said, we have been under martial law discipline, and as he said, there are those who still doubt. We're like a patient who has been sick, and having been cured, the doctor tells him to go take the first steps and go and fend for himself. And there is some doubt, but I do believe that with all the groundwork laid under martial law, we will be able to come out with a newly invigorated democratic society.
Sir, a newly invigorated democratic society will also mean a level of responsibility on the members of the opposition. What do you look for in this opposition as it looks today?
Well, I think they are beginning in the first place to collect their wits. I mean, I have been reading their platform, and frankly, I don't think it is a platform that has much substance. They are taking the first faltering steps, if you will permit me. For instance, on the matter of American military bases, several months ago the opposition said we are for the dismantling of these bases. Now 2 or 3 days ago, when the UNIDO came out with its platform, it said the people must decide whether these bases should be there or not. Now where do they stand? But I do hope that they'll be able to come together, and with the fears that they had of martial law, now a thing of the past, I do hope that they can come together with a responsible platform and challenge the premises of the policies of the administration. I also hope that we will avoid the recrimination, the bitterness, the backbiting, and what the president said, the scandalous debate in the past, because all of us will be losers. So I am very much encouraged by what happened today, and I have every faith that the Filipino people will take hold of themselves and take the reins of government, which is the essence of democracy.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman Emmanuel Pelaez. Thank you very much, sir. Rita?
We have had a series of brief interviews here with several officials and civilians who have given us their reactions and observations on the lifting of the proclamation of martial law throughout the country. And perhaps indeed we can see that replicated throughout the country are various reactions from the 48 million Filipinos affected by this proclamation to lift martial law throughout the country. It has been stressed that media indeed plays a very sensitive and a very important role as far as transmitting these effects are concerned. And of course, in this manner, we at Maharlika Broadcasting System feel with pride, together with the rest of the Filipino people, to have been able to cover this event live to you and to the rest of the nation.
Well put, Rita. I think that this has been an emotional moment in a sense for all of us. As I said at the beginning of this telecast, when President Marcos proclaimed martial law, he was all alone. Today, when he lifts it, he is with a broad cross-section of our people. And that must tell you something. That this man, over these 8 years, has received recognition for his stewardship of our and of our people.